Okay, we're on the top of Ayin Vav Amid Aleph. Yesterday, we were talking about the principle of a Beishar. When a residence acts as a thoroughfare for other people, then halachically it doesn't have the status of a residence. Now there are two ramifications. We discussed one ramification yesterday. The ramification that we discussed yesterday is that if someone is living in that domicile that is used as a thoroughfare by others, then he's not considered to be a real resident of the courtyard. And as such, he is not required to contribute bread to the ERU. We can make an ERU without him and would be permitted to carry. He's like a guest. He's not a real resident. We're going to see another ramification today, and that is the place where we put down our ERU in our Chatzer has to be a residential area of the Chatzer. Therefore, if we put our bread down into a Beishar, resting in a thoroughfare, then we have not made a proper Eruv. The Eruv is not kosher. Okay, so that's an important ramification as well. So therefore, with that in mind, let's take a look at the next case. It's on the end of the third line on Ayin Vav Amid Aleph. Badik luhu Rachba l'Rabbana. Rachba, the sage, wanted to quiz the rabbis and see how smart they were. He gave them a thought question to see if he could chap them. And the question that he asked them was, Beis chatzeros u beis batim beineim. You've got two courtyards. You've got the eastern courtyard and you've got the western courtyard. And you've got, dividing these two courtyards, are two houses that are sandwiched in between the two courtyards. The house on the east opens up to the courtyard on the east, and the house on the west opens up to the courtyard on the west. And these two houses are connected to each other. So in theory, you could walk through from the eastern courtyard to the western courtyard via the two houses. Okay? That's the case. So it's a bizarre kind of scenario. And Zeh ba derech zeh v'nasan eruva bazeh, v'zeh barach derech zeh v'nasan eruva bazeh. So here's what happens. The people in the eastern courtyard choose to place their eruv. They put their bread down, not in the eastern courtyard, but rather in the eastern house, but rather in the western house. So basically, in the house, because you have to put the eruv in a place of residence. So they choose, instead of choosing the house that is most adjacent to them, they choose the house that is further away from them, and they put their eruv there. And the people in the western courtyard do the exact same thing, and they put the eruv down in the eastern courtyard, the house further away from them. Now, let's think about this for a second. So really, Rachba's question is, does it work? Kanu eruv olo. Does the eruv work or not? Now, think about it for a second. In order for me to be able to, if I'm in the eastern courtyard and I want to access the western house, how do I access it? I have to walk through the eastern house. So for me, the eastern house is a thoroughfare. I've designated the eastern house as my thoroughfare. The western house is a place of residence, and I'm putting the eruv down there. That's for the guys in the eastern courtyard. Now let's look at the guys in the western courtyard. They're just the opposite. They've designated the eastern house as the place of residence, and the western house as the thoroughfare, just the opposite. The question is, as the Gemara phrases it, we basically have conflicting interests. The interests of the people in the eastern courtyard are for the eastern house to be a thoroughfare and the western house to be a house. And the interests of the other courtyard are exactly the opposite. They want the western house to be a thoroughfare and the eastern house to be a house. Can we have conflicting interests such that for you guys, that's a house and that's a thoroughfare, and for us, that's a house and that's a thoroughfare? That's the question, because they're conflicting interests. Because mima nafshach, if it's a thoroughfare, then I can't put an eruv down there. The eruv is not kosher if it's deposited in a thoroughfare, in a beishar. It has to be deposited in a house. But if for you it's a thoroughfare, the place where I'm putting it down, then how can it be in an eruv for me? Do you see the dilemma? So the Gemara says, Mi mashvinu l'gabi dahai bayis u'lagabi dahai beishar, u'lagabi dahai beishar, u'lagabi dahai bayis. Is it possible that for one group, this one's a house and that one's a thoroughfare, and for the other group, this one's a thoroughfare and that one's a house. Amrulei shnein lo kanu eruv manafshach. And so the rabbis responded, it can't work because it's a contradiction. Because Beishar mashvis le hanosin esruv beishar ach sadru mepesas eno eruv. He says it's not going to work because anytime a person deposits an eruv in a thoroughfare, as this teaching teaches us, a person who places an eruv in a beishar, in a thoroughfare, or an achsadra, a portico, or a porch, that's not an eruv. It has to be placed in a residence. Ibayis mashvis le kometalto lebayis lo ma'arev le. And let's look at it the other possibility. If you turn that, let's say for the people of the eastern courtyard, they have to view the eastern house as a thoroughfare, because if they view it as a house, and they're not being ma'arev with that house, they're only being ma'arev with the house behind it, then how are they going to access the food? They have no access to the food, because you can't access the food in the western house unless you're making an eruv together with the eastern house. And if they're not using the eastern house as part of their shituf, as part of their partnership, as part of their corporation, then it turns out that they put the food down in a place which is inaccessible to them on Shabbos. Anytime you put an eruv in a place which you cannot access on Shabbos, then it's not a valid eruv either. So basically the bottom line of the Gemara is, at least at this point, is that the Chachamim are saying to him, it's not going to work. You can't have for one group of people, this is a house and that's a thoroughfare, and for the other group of people, just the opposite.
Do you have to have access to the eruv 25 hours?
No, as long as it was accessible bein hashmashos, then it's okay. As long as it was accessible at the inception of Shabbos.
I guess my point is, if they were to decide, and this is just maybe a theoretical answer, but if they decide that Friday night this house would be the thoroughfare,
it's only going to help one group.
The next morning.
No, the eruv has to be valid at the inception of Shabbos. The eruv has to be kona
for both sides.
For both sides at the inception of Shabbos.
They only needed one good rabbi to tell them to do it the right way. This would be
right. That's why this is a thought experiment. This is not a practical issue, because there's a simple remedy. But Rachba is saying, what if they do it this way? Now, frekt Rachba, he says, umayshna midarava. But one second, why, just because we have conflicting interests, can't we live with the conflict? The Amar Rava, Amru lo shnaim tzei va'arov aleinu, or va'arev aleinu, la'echad irev alav miba'ojom, u'le'echad irev alav ben hashmashos. Zeh she'irev alav miba'ojom, nechal eruv ben hashmashos, v'zeh she'irev alav ben hashmashos, nechal eruv mishetech. So shneim kanu eruv. The case is as follows. Rava had said an interesting case. Reuven and Shimon go over to a guy. They say, we would like you to make an eruv tchumen for us so that we can extend our tchum beyond the borders. So the guy says, fine, no problem. He takes their food parcels, but he runs out of time before Shabbos. He takes Reuven's food parcel and puts it down before lich benching, before candlelighting. And with Shimon's, he puts it down in the twilight hour. Bein hashmashos. Now, bein hashmashos has a din of safek yom, safek laila, right? So the problem is that we say normally safek derabanan lekula, that since we're dealing with rabbinic law, we can be lenient. But here's the dilemma. Reuven's eruv that was put down before lich benching got eaten bein hashmashos. So if you view bein hashmashos as daytime, then he was never kona shvisa. There was never any setting in of the eruv while it was Shabbos. Shimon had his eruv put down bein hashmashos, and then it got eaten afterwards. So for Shimon, you need to consider bein hashmashos daytime. For Reuven, you need to consider bein hashmashos nighttime. So the halacha is, says Rav, shneim kanu eruv. It's fine. It's no problem. Even though there's conflicting interests here, even though that Reuven and Shimon both want the eruv, the only way it'll work for Reuven is if you consider twilight as being nighttime, and the only way that it'll work for Shimon is if you consider it to be twilight as daytime. How can it work if there are contradictory interests? If you're telling me that contradictory interests don't work, why does it work there? So the Gemara says, no, it's different. Hachi hashta hasam safek yamama safek leila lo minkara milsa. Aval hacha ida legabi dahai bias legabi dahai bias legabi dahai beishar legabi dahai nami beishar. Answers the Gemara. In the case of Rava, you're dealing with abstract time concepts, and therefore it's not as conspicuous that you're dealing with contradictory interests, because over in Rava's situation, you're dealing with abstract time. What time? What is Bein Hashmashos now? Is it day or is it night? So we can say for you it's day and for you it's night. There's nothing in front of us that we can point to as a contradiction. But over here we're dealing with something physical and spatial that's right in front of us. If this is a house for you guys, then it's got to be a house for those guys as well. And if this is a thoroughfare for these guys, then it's got to be a thoroughfare for you guys. To be able to have something in front of you that's real and visceral that you can point to and say that for one group it's a house and the other group it's a thoroughfare, that's too much of a contradiction, and even Rava would agree that we don't allow. Let's go on. Hadron Allah Hador. Now, we're going to learn basically, we're going to do some geometry today, but before we do that, let's look at the basic halacha, which is very straightforward. Chalon shebein beis chatzeros dalad al dalad beso chasara ma'arvin shnayim v'imrotzim ma'arvin echad. So if you have a window, or really just an aperture that is in the wall that divides between two chatzers, then the aperture has to be significant enough such that the access is you can easily access between one chatzer and another in order to be able to incorporate both chatzers together. So what's that measurement? The Mishnah tells us that the aperture has to be at least 4 by 4 tfachim in a square, and it also has to be within 10 tfachim from the ground. That way, a person can easily transfer items back and forth, and he can easily even potentially squeeze through that aperture himself. David, should we learn in the memory of your father today?
Please.
What's his name?
Yaakov Leib ben Chaim Shmuel.
Yaakov Leib ben Chaim Shmuel. The Shama should have an aliyah.
Right.
Okay. Midalet al dalet olamala miyud ma'arvin shnaim ve'in ma'arvin echad. So therefore, by contrast, if the aperture is less than 4 by 4, or if the aperture is above 10 tfachim, even if it's 4 by 4, so then it's not a legitimate connection between the two chatzers, and therefore the chatzers have to make separate eruvin. They can't incorporate together. In the previous case, they have the option. They can either make it one big corporate entity, or they can make separate eruvin because there's a wall that divides them. The choice is theirs. But in the latter case, they only have the option of making two separate eruvin. The Gemara now says, Lema Tnan Stomach Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So the Gemara now says, from our Mishnah, we should be able to adduce that our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The Omar Kol Pachos Midalid Kulav Vidami. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was discussing the halacha of lavud. Just to remind you what lavud is, we've seen it so many times, but I'll just refresh your memory. The principle of lavud says that when you have two physical surfaces that are within a certain distance, minimal distance from each other, those two surfaces are halachically considered to be conjoined and connected such that there's no space between the two of them at all. That's the principle of lavud. And therefore, there are many practical applications of this in the laws of Sukkah and the laws of Shabbos with dealing with walls. But it seems like from our Mishnah, we saw a machlokas in Masechah Shabbos as to whether the distance, that minimal distance of lavud is 3 tfachim, which is the Chachamim Shita, or whether it's 4 tfachim, which is according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. It seems that our Mishnah is subscribing to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, because basically the Mishnah is saying is that you need an aperture that's wider than 4 by 4 tfachim, because if it's anything less than 4 by 4 tfachim, then you view it as completely sealed off, and therefore it blocks the opportunity to incorporate both chatzers together. So the Gemara says, it seems like we're going like Rav Shimon Gamliel. So the Gemara says, no. Afilu tema kerabanan ad kan lo pligi rabbanan leid Rav Shimon Gamliel ela le'inin levudim. Aval le'inyan pischa afilu rabbanan modu di'ika dalad al dalad chashav v'lo lo chashav. That, no, you're comparing apples and oranges. The principle of lavud is as far as when do we view as two surfaces as to be conjoined. But over here, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an aperture to allow for connectivity between two courtyards. And that, even the Chachamim agree, even though, according to the Chachamim, you don't say the principle of lavud unless they're proximal to each other within 3 tvachim. But over here, you need to have a significant opening, aperture, in order for for there to be that sense of connectivity between two courtyards, and for that you need a 4x4 aperture. It's got nothing to do with Loved over here. That's basically what the Gemara's conclusion is. Okay, now the Gemara says, Pachos midalad v'chulei, if however, if it's less than 4x4, or if it's above 10 tfachim, so then you cannot make an eruv between the two courtyards. So the Gemara now says something. The Gemara says, why is it necessary? Pshita. Kevin de Amar Dalal al Dalad Besoch Asara Mimela Ana Yadana de Pachos Midadal Lamala Miyud Lo. The Gemara's question is very basic. I don't understand. The first line in the Mishnah told me that the required measurements in order to connect the two chatzers is an aperture of 4x4 that's within 10 tfachim. So why is the whole second line of the Mishnah necessary, which says, but if it's less than 4x4 and it's higher than 10 tfachim, it's not going to work? I can't make that inference on my own? Like if I tell you, what's the minimum height for this roller coaster ride? It's 5 feet tall. So do you need someone to tell me, but if you're less than 5 feet, you can't go on the roller coaster? No, obviously. If you know that the minimal height is 5 feet, then you know that less than 5 feet, it's not going to work. So why is it necessary for the Mishnah to say the whole second part of the Mishnah? The Gemara says, I'll tell you why. If you only had the first line in our Mishnah, it's a little bit ambiguous as far as how much into the 10 tfachim does that aperture have to be. Does the entire aperture have to be lower than 10 tfachim, or only a portion of it have to be dip below that 10 tfachim mark? So that's not clear from the Reisha. Comes along the Seifa and tells me that even if a small percentage of that aperture dips below 10 tfachim, then it's still kosher.
Still, if it's 4x4 above, then it's okay?
No.
I mean, then...
If it has to be 4x4, and it has to be within 10 tfachim. Within 10 tfachim to the ground.
Right, so 4x4 above 10 tfachim
is possible.
It's possible. So
that's
why
right.
is it pshita then?
Because the Mishnah...
You might think 4x4 above 10 is also...
No. The Mishnah had said that the required measurements are 4x4 and within 10 tfachim. That's the first line of the Mishnah.
Okay, so it says within tfachim.
Yeah, it says Chalon shebein beis chasdal ledal beso chasar.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So the Gemara now says Tanina laha. We've already learned this. We have a brayso that states this explicitly. That as long as even a portion of the aperture is within 10 tfachim, then it's acceptable. The Tanu Rabbanan. Kulo lamala miyud umiksasu besoch chasara, or kulo besoch yud umiksasu lamayla miyud ma'arvin shnayim v'imratzu ma'arvin echad. The brayso says that if the entire window, except for a small part, is above 10, but only a small part is below 10, then it's kosher. Or if it's completely within 10 tfachim and only a small part is above 10 tfachim, that's also kosher to allow the two chatzers to make an eruv together if they want to. So the Gemara now says, okay, fine, the brayso states that explicitly, but I don't understand the brayso. You don't need to say both statements. Hashta, kulo l'malo miyuda miktsasa b'soch yud amart ma'arvin shnayim v'imratzu ma'arvin echad, kulo b'soch yud miktsasa l'malo miyud mibaya. I don't understand, says the Gemara. If the first statement of the brayso was that even if a small part of the aperture is below 10 tfachim, it's kosher, then kol shekain, kal v'chomer, that if the entire aperture is below 10 tfachim, except for a little bit that's protruding upwards, then of course that's going to be kosher. Why did you need the whole second line of the brayso? The Gemara says, Zu ve'in sarach lomar zu ketani. The Gemara says, you're right. You didn't need the second line of the brayso. For stylistic reasons, sometimes the Tana will tell us a halacha that goes without saying this, and it goes without saying that. That's sometimes stylistically. A lot of times the Tanoim wrote words that give us information that we already knew, but for the purpose of mnemonics or memorization, sometimes they added additional verbiage. And that's what it seems to be what this Tana of this brayso was doing over here. Now we're going to get into some geometry, okay? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Chalon agul tzarich sheyeh behekefo esrim ve'arba tfachim, u'shnayim u'mashu mehen besoch yud, shem yira ve'enu nimtza mashu besoch yud. Okay, he makes the following statement of Rabbi Yochanan, which we're going to see his math is off. But first we're just going to take it at face value. We said you need an aperture that's 4x4, and it has to dip, it's got a 4x4 square that has to dip below 10 tfachim. What if your aperture is circular and it's not square? Well, you need to determine, do you have bounded inside that circle, do you have a square of 4 by 4? The only way that will be fulfilled is if the circumference of the circle is 24 tfachim, in which case then you are assured that the square that is bounded inside of the circle will be 4 by 4. Plus, as far as the height of the circular aperture, you want to make sure that the imaginary square that's bounded inside that circle dips below the 10 tfachim mark. So then you have to look at the lowest point of the circle. The lowest point of the circle can't just touch the 10 tfachim mark. It's got to go below the 2 tfachim, below the 10 tfachim mark, in order for the imaginary square that is bounded inside of it to dip into the 10 tfachim mark, because the imaginary square is 2 tfachim above the lowest point of the circle. Okay? That's the statement that Rabbi Yochanan makes. Now, as you'll be able to discover quite simply, a circumference of 24 doesn't work. It's way too big in order for you to have a square bounded within a 4 by 4. Just think about it for a second. Okay, 24. What is pi? Pi is 3. We know that from 10th grade geometry or 9th grade geometry that pi d equals circumference. The diameter times pi, which for the purposes of the Gemara is the number 3, you multiply the diameter by 3 and you get the circumference. So if the circumference needs to be 24, then what is the diameter?
8.
The diameter is 8. Now think about this for a second, Rabbi. You have a square that's bounded inside a circle. The hypotenuse of that square, which means if you divide the square into 2 right-angled triangles and you draw a diagonal line across, that's tantamount to the diameter of the circle. So if the diameter, if the hypotenuse over here is 8, then what are the right-angle sides of that triangle? Are they 4? Come on, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the Pythagorean theorem. So if this is 8, and you want to know what the value of, and this is c, and you want to know what the value of a and b are, so you square 8 to get 64. So a squared plus b squared is 32 plus 32. Take the square root of 32. And what is the square root of 32, Rabbi Isai? 5.5. About 5.5, Jack, right? Okay, about 5.5.
Very good, Jack.
That's much more. Well, come on, it's got to be between 5 and 6, right? So, because 5 times 5 is 25, 6 times 6 is 36. So you know that 32 is somewhere between 5 and 6, right? That's way bigger than 4 by 4. That's 5.5 by 5.5. So you don't need a circumference of 24. You need a circumference of something significantly less than 24 in order to be able to get a square of 4 by 4 on the inside. That's our problem. Okay, we've got a big problem here. So let's take a look. The Gemara realizes that this is problematic. We don't understand Rabbi Yochanan's math. Okay, so now that's going to be the Gemara's issue. So the Gemara now says, Mechti, let's take a look at this. Kol sheyesh behekefo shlosha tfachim, yesh bo berochvo tefach. He says, 1 second. The Gemara is actually ignoring something right now, which is, I spoke out that this is the hypotenuse, the diameter is the hypotenuse. The Gemara at this stage thinks that the length of each side of the square is going to be equal to the diameter. Now that's wrong, but the Gemara is going to entertain that possibility for just a moment. We know that the diameter of any circle is 1/3 of its circumference, right? That if something has a circumference of 3, then it has a diameter of 1. So therefore, betracer sagya, then if you just want to be able to accomplish that the side of the square fits into the circle as its diameter, so then all you should need for 4 is take 4 by 3 and 12. You should have a circumference of 12. The Gemara says no. Hani mili bi'igula avol biribua ba'inon tfei. But that's only true that you want to when you want to have a diameter that goes from one end of the circle to the other. But if you have a square that's bounded inside the circle, so then you need the circle to be larger in order to get the sides of the square to fit inside and still be 4 by 4. So the Gemara says, okay, but wait a minute. Mechti kama meruba yeser al ha'agul revia. We learned before not a case of a square inside a circle. We learned the opposite case of a circle inside a square. Do you remember we learned that? When did we learn this? We were talking about measuring the city boundaries, right? And what you do, you square off a city. So if the city is circular, you square it off. You put a square outside the circle. And the Gemara had said, geometrically, we know that a square is a quarter larger than a circle. If a square is a quarter larger than a circle, so then the difference between the two is a quarter. So b'shitzra sagya, and you're telling me that 12 of a circumference is insufficient, so then just add a quarter to that and you'll get 16. So the Gemara says, so then why does the circumference of 16 suffice? No, the Gemara says that's not going to work because hani mili igula denafik migav ribua aval ribua denafik migav igula buinan tvei ma'itama mishum mursha dekarnasa. The Gemara says you're making a fundamental error. The only time that the difference in size between a square and a circle is a quarter is when the circle's inside the square. But when the square is inside the circle, the differential between the size of the circle and the size of the square is significantly more than a quarter. Why? Because of the protrusions of the corner of the square push out further. And therefore there's much more space in these sides that go outside the square, inside the circle, and you need to have an equation that's going to make it more than a circumference of 16. So the Gemara says, Mechti kol amso beriba ua amso trei chumshe balachsona b'shivson chi chumshasag. Now the Gemara comes out with the right calculation. Now the Gemara is thinking about it correctly. So 1 second. Think about the diameter of the circle as the hypotenuse that runs diagonally through the square. We know that any time that you have a square of 1 by 1, then the hypotenuse will be 1 2/5. If that's the case, then using that kind of mathematical equation, so then if you have 4 by 4 on either side, so then so kol amsa b'ribuah. So then you're going to have 5 and 5.6, or 5 and 6/10, or 5 and 5.6 will be the length of the hypotenuse of the square that's 4 by 4. And if that's the case, multiply that by 3, and what do you get? 16.8. 16.8 is much less than 24. So why doesn't a circle of circumference of 16.8 work in order to be able to accomplish a square of 4 by 4? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan Omar ki dayoni de Kesari, v'amri lo ki rabbanan de Kesari. The answer is that Rabbi Yochanan was using a different form of math. He was using a different mathematical equation that goes according to the judges, and some say the rabbis of Kesari. The Amri igula migav rivua riva ribua migav igula palga. They said that when you have a square outside a circle, the differential in size is going to be 1/4. But when you have a square inside a circle, the differential between the two of them is going to be 1/2. And therefore you need a hypotenuse of 8, which is the diameter of the circle, in order to be able to get a square inside of 4 by 4. That's the math of the rabbis or the judges of Kesari. Now we know that's wrong. I mean, it's like telling me, I go according, it's like if you go to a doctor and he tells you, we need to take out your appendix. Why? Well, I hold of a certain kind of ancient Eastern medicine that says that if you take out the appendix, you'll be healthier. But my appendix is not diseased. Well, I have a certain shita that I go by. But it's wrong, it's bad medicine. This is bad math. Well, the fact of the matter is that if you have a hypotenuse of 8, then the sides of the right angle triangle are going to be much more than 4. So you can't tell me that Rabbi Yochanan paskins like them. You don't paskin like someone when it comes to math. Math is absolute. So this is crazy. This more doesn't make any sense. Tosfos asked this question. This is not my question. Tosfos says, how could Rabbi Yochanan rely on erroneous math? Math is absolute. There's no such thing as I paskin like this. I paskin the 2 plus 2 is 5, and even you paskin the 2 plus 2 is 4. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. You don't say that. Come on. So Tosfos asked this question. Tosfos actually comes up with a solution that, based upon a different way of looking at the scenario, the math works out. I'll let you go through Tosfos on your own. But in the meantime, because it's a little bit more complicated, but the bottom line is that you have to realize that what the Gemara's real conclusion is that at the end of the day, the circle does not have to be 24 in circumference. Aliba de Hilchasa, the circle has to be able to bound the square of 4 by 4, and that's going to be 16.8 of the circumference. Bottom line. Let's go weiter. Pachos midalit al dalit v'chulei. that if you have an aperture that's less than 4 by 4, or if it's higher than 10 tfachim, it's not going to work. Amar Rav Nachman lo shanu ela chalon shebein beis chatzeros, aval chalon shebein beis batam afilu l'malo me'asar nami imratzu la'arev ma'arvin echad. So he says as follows, says Rav Nachman. He says the only time that we require the aperture to be lower than 10 tfachim is if you're dealing with 2 open courtyards. But if you're dealing with 2 houses that are connected to each other, then even if the aperture, the window that connects the 2 houses is higher than 10 tfachim, as long as it's 4 by 4, it's still a kosher conjunction. Now the question is why? The answer is, my time of basic command demoli dummy. Because we look at a house as if it's completely filled with solid mass. And therefore, we can imagine that the floor rises up all the way to the window, and therefore it's lower than 10 tvachim using that kind of imaginary conception. We've had this principle before, that when you have a covered, a roofed area, then the entire area can sometimes halachically be considered a full, solid mass. Eisvei Rava Rav Nachman. Rava challenges Rav Nachman from a brisa. The brisa says, "Echad li chalon shebein beis chatzeros, ve'echad li chalon shebein beis batim, ve'echad li chalon shebein beis aliyos, ve'echad li chalon shebein beis gagim, ve'echad li chalon shebein beis chadorim, kulan dalad al dalad besoch hasora." This brisa says it makes no difference whether you're dealing with a window between courtyards, between houses, between rooftops, between 2 attics, etc. You always need an aperture of 4 by 4 that's within 10 tfachim from the ground. So how can you tell me that if you're dealing with 2 houses, it doesn't have to be within 10 tfachim of the ground? So tirgama chatzeros. So he says, Rav Nachman, that brisa only requires within 10 tfachim for chatzers, not for houses. But one second, but it says echad this and echad that. Anytime a brisa gives you a list, and it says echad this and echad that, the word echad means it makes no difference whether you're dealing with this or you're dealing with that. In all of the following cases, the halacha is the same. So how can you tell me the halacha only applies to chatzers and not to batim? The Gemara says, Tirgama dalet al dalet. Rav Nachman will tell you that when the Bryce is creating universality in all of the cases, it's only about the aperture of 4 by 4. But as far as the height of 10, that's not universal. For chatzers, it needs to be lower than 10. For houses, it can be higher than 10. Ba'amine Rabbi Abba mi Rav Nachman. Lula pasuach min bayas la'aliyat tzarech sulam kavua lahatira, ein tzarech sulam kavua lahatira. The question that he asked was, what if you have 2 residences, one stacked on top of the other? One is a second floor, one is a first floor, and the access way between the 2 is a skylight, is a hole in the ceiling of the ground floor that leads up into the attic. And the question is, in order to consider these two domiciles connected, obviously you have to have an aperture that's 4 by 4. The question is, do you need a ladder to be affixed to that aperture in order for the 2 to be considered to be connected? So ki amrinan beisa kiman demoli dami hani mili min hatzara vol beemtzalo o dilmolo shna. Because my question is this: when you told me that when you have 2 houses connected, the aperture can be higher than 10 tfachim, maybe that's only true when it's on the side on a wall. But if it's on the ceiling of the ground floor, maybe the only way to consider these 2 domiciles connected is if there's a ladder affixed to that aperture, in which case it creates that connection. But without a ladder, they're not considered connected. So Amar Lei Eino Tzarech, and Rav Nachman said you don't need a ladder. They're still considered connected. So Savr Mina Sulam Kavuhu Deino Tzarech Sulam Arai Tzarech. So the questioner Rabbi Abba still thought, well, then maybe you just don't need a fixed ladder, but maybe you need a ladder available in the house to be able to get up there. If there's no ladder mamish at all, and you can't mamish climb up into the attic, so then maybe you can't make an eruv. But no, Itmar Amar Rav Yosef Ramin Yumim Rav Nachman, that Rav Yosef quotes his Rebbe Rav Nachman as saying that Echad Sulam Kavua V'Echad Sulam Arayin. So you don't even need a non-fixed ladder. You don't need a ladder at all. As long as you have an aperture that connects the two domiciles, then it's considered to be eruvable. It's considered to be connected enough to make an eruv between the 2. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kosel shebein beis chatzeros gavo asar v'rochav arba'a ma'arvin shnayim ve'in ma'arvin echad. If you have a wall that divides between 2 courtyards, so obviously the 2 courtyards make their own separate eruv, and they cannot connect to each other because there's no connection between the two chatzers. But the question, so therefore, that's why the Mishnah says, Ma'arvin Shnaim, they have to make their separate Eruvin and they can't join together. Hayu barosho peros elo olan mikan va'ochlin ve'elo olan mikan va'ochlin. Now here we get into the thickness of the wall. The Mishnah had also told us that the wall is 4 tefachim wide. Now that's not a necessary criterion to divide the two chutzers, but it's relevant for the following halacha. That if you have a wall that is 4 tefachim wide, and resting on the top of the wall, which is a pretty thick wall, you have produce, you got apples, you got raisins, whatever you got up there. So then, elo olan mikan va'ochlin, ve'elo olan mikan va'ochlin, uvad shelo yoridu lamata. Then the members of either chatzer are allowed to go to the top of the wall and to nibble on the apples that are on top of the wall, but they can't take the apples off the wall. They can go bobbing for apples on the top of the wall, but they can take a bite out of the apple on top of the wall, but they can't pull it off the wall. And the reason seems to be that the top of the wall is because these two chutzers did not make an eruv with each other. It's like a no man's land, which doesn't allow me to remove the apple into either domain. And the Gemara will clarify this momentarily. Nifratz hakos el areser amos ma'arvin shnaim v'imratzu ma'arvin echad mipnei shehu kepesach. Next case is that let's say a breach forms in the wall. If a breach forms in the wall, that as long as the breach is less than 10 amos wide, then it's considered to be a doorway between these two chutzers, and therefore the members of the chutzers have the right to either cooperate with each other, or they have a right to make separate eruvin because it's either 2 courtyards or 1 courtyard, depending upon what their wish is. However, Yoser mikan ma'arvin echad ve'in ma'arvin shnaim. But if, however, the breach is wider than 10 amos, then it's considered as if you don't have a wall at all dividing between the two chutzers. They are considered to be de facto one domain, and therefore they don't have a right to divide their eruvin up. They have to make one eruv for all the members of the chutzer, and therefore if one member of the other chutzer doesn't contribute, then the eruv will not work for anybody. Let's take a look at the Gemara for just a minute. We're going to go another few lines and then we'll be done. Ein bo arba'a mai. What if the wall is not 4 tefachim wide? What will be the halacha, the status of those apples that are on top of the wall? Amar Rav, avir shtei rishio shaletis bo lo yozes bo afilu malo nima. So Rav says, well then you can't move the apples at all, because basically not only is it a no man's land, but it's sort of like conflicting territory. It's territory that both chutzers are vying for, are sort of like in a tug of war for, and therefore you can't even move it a hair's breadth, because by moving it even slightly, pulling it towards you, you're pulling something out of the domain that is partially owned by the other, and therefore you can't move it at all. That's what Rav's opinion is. Rabbi Yochanan Amar elu malin mikan va'ochlin ve'elu malin mikan va'ochlin. And Rabbi Yochanan says just to the contrary, au contraire. He says that no, when the wall is 4 tefachim wide, then it has a din of its own rishus. It's a rishus hayachid, and that's why you can't transfer the apple from the top of the wall into your courtyard, which is a karmelis. It's a separate rishus. It's a separate domain. However, in this case, where the wall is less than 4 tefachim wide, you know what it's called? A makom pitur. And remember the term makom pitur that we learned all the way at the beginning of Masechah Shabbos. We had said that a makom pitur is like a free zone. Not only is it permitted to eat the apples on top of the wall, but then you can actually pick the apple off and bring it into your courtyard. It's a free zone. And basically the way it works is that you're allowed to always transfer items from either a Rishus HaYachid or a Rishus HaRabim to a Makom Pitur and from a Makom Pitur with complete impunity. So therefore the same thing here. The apples are in a Makom Pitur. The wall is less than 4 tefachim wide, higher than 10 tefachim high, and therefore you can move the apples freely from the wall down to either courtyard, whichever one you want. So, Tanan, I have to go further because I'm sorry. Tanan, elu olin mikan ve'ochlin ve'elu olin mikan ve'ochlin. So 1 second, the Mishnah had said that when the apples are on top of the wall, it doesn't make any sense, says the Rabbi Yochanan, you're going against the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that when the apples are on top of the wall, you have to go up to the apple and eat it on top of the wall. Olin in, malin low. You're not, you see, you're not allowed to pull it down into the chutzner. So the Gemara says, Hachi kamer, yesh bo arba'a, olin in, malin low. Ein bo arba'a, malin nami. That the Mishnah is talking about where the wall is 4 tefachim wide. Then it's a separate rishus, and therefore you can go up to the wall and eat the apples, but you can't bring them into your chatzir. But when the wall is less than 4 tefachim wide, it's a makom petur, and therefore you can bring it into your rishus as well. Ve'az the Rabbi Yochanan l'tami. Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his reasoning. Dachi asa Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan makom shein bo arba al arba mutar livnei rishus harabim v'nei rishus hayachal lekaseifa lavu avad shelo yachalifu. So, because Rabbi Yochanan had said this is the standard halacha of makom petur, that if you have a makom petur that is between a rishus hayachid and a rishus harabim, then the members of the rishus hayachid can place their objects on the makom petur, like a fire hydrant, and remove them, and the people of the rishus harabim can do the same thing. The only thing that you can't do rabbinically is have a guy take his apple from Rishus HaYachid, put it on the fire hydrant, and then the guy from Rishus HaRabim to take the apple off of that. Because we're scared that if we allow that, even though technically it's permitted, will cause people to transfer directly from a Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. But you see that a Makom Petur, you can transfer from a Makom Petur and to a Makom Petur with impunity. So frek the Gemara of Rav Leslie to Rav Dimi, question mark? How can Rav not hold of this basic halacha of Rav Dimi? It seems to be a universally accepted halacha. The Gemara answers no. Answers the Gemara, you're right. Rav does hold of the halacha of a makom petur, but only when it comes to transferring from biblical domains like a rishus hayachid or rishus harabim to a makom petur and from a makom petur. But when it comes to rabbinical domains of two separate courtyards, Rav holds you have to be even more machmir, and we don't allow you to transfer from a rabbinically prohibited or segregated domain to a makom petur and vice versa. Why? The chachamim have to reinforce their halachic domains more than biblical domains. Biblically, the Torah doesn't need to reinforce itself because we know that you're going to take biblical law seriously. Rabbinic law, we're scared you're going to abuse, and therefore the Chachamim were concerned that, out of a concern for abusing rabbinic law, we will require that you don't move something from a Makom Petur into a Carmelis and vice versa. Have a wonderful day.